build friendships with people that have adjacent skills to you. Don't build friendships with people that all have the same skills as you. You want to find people that offer something unique and something that's really good, because then you're offering something as well, something that they don't have. So try to get really great founders, really great co-founders. That's one of my biggest tips.
Most people underestimate what you can accomplish as a teenager. In this founder chat, you will hear from Matt Salsamendi, who started his entrepreneurial journey at just 12 years old. He sold his startup to Microsoft for millions when he was just 19. If you're a teen and looking to build and scale a startup to an exit, this video is for you. If you learned something new, be sure to subscribe for more content like this. Matt, first of all, one of his biggest titles, selected into the Forbes 30 under 30 in the gaming space in 2017, said to be one of the people leading a technological and artistic revolution. You guys might have caught some of the things I'm going to say on his Discord intro, but he built his first startup at 13 years old, where he had a Minecraft server hosting business. After being an avid Minecraft fan, I assume himself, he started that up with $7 from his dad and an old computer that they just had lying around the house. And by age 15, they had 1 million servers being hosted with around $5 million a year in revenue. So that's kind of the origin story. After that, Matt moved from Florida to Seattle to launch Beam, later rebranded to Mixer. After they were acquired from Microsoft, Beam was a low latency interactive live streaming platform that we'll go into later. And this was sold to Microsoft in 2016 and grew to around 25 million monthly users. After conquering the heights of the startup space, he's now spending time on his passions, building laser shows in his house and also for large venues, and flying and getting his pilot's license. Matt, you got a couple minutes to jump in on something I missed?
That was an awesome intro. I think you touched on pretty much everything, but I'm excited to be here. I think starting really early on, I started MSpro when I was 13. I was super passionate about it. I had some of maybe the same problems that I think a lot of you guys are going through, kind of trying to juggle how do you manage school with something maybe you're more passionate about, kind of taking and scaling and building something. So I'm just eager to connect and see how I can be helpful and talk about my experience. And my dog Coda is here with us, and I'm excited. So
all right. Awesome. I saw a quick story of yours where in 7th grade, you hid in a locker with your phone during PE to fix a crash for a customer. What I'm thinking about is kind of what was your background / experience at the time that allowed you to get into this business and be able to be the guy that's on his phone during PE fixing a server?
Yeah, it goes back even further than that. So since I was super young, 6, 7, 8 years old, I would take apart anything I could find. So I had any computers that I could get my hands on, they would be disassembled immediately and then hopefully reassembled in a working order. Not always, though, to my parents' dismay. So I really enjoyed kind of learning anything and everything I could about the little details behind how things work that I used. And I think what really started to get it going and how I started applying stuff is I started playing games with my family at first on like a local area network. So I had Age of Empires, and my sisters and I would all battle it out. And I try to figure out like, how can I connect these up and play local multiplayer? And so a lot of those early learnings translated when my friend came over and showed me Minecraft. And I was hooked. Like, this was in 2011. I joined in like beta 1.7.1 for Minecraft. And I was having such an amazing time, but my friend had to go home. And so at that point, it was a question of how can I set up a server on the internet? And it was a lot of Google. So it's like, how do I port forward? I grabbed some extra computer that was underneath my parents' desk. And like, can I borrow this real quick? And set up the Minecraft server. And I didn't know what I was doing, but going into it was a lot of learning. And I think some of those things, like that passion very early on for playing games with other people, helped. The business was created because we had hosted the server for me and a couple friends. And some of those friends wanted their own. And I was like, you know what? Give me $10 a month and I'll put up another server on this computer underneath my parents' desk, my parents' AT&T home internet. I'll do that. So we started scaling. I met my co-founder, James. And then I found myself a couple years later in a locker room getting this phone call. I guess it was a text message like, hey, one of our most critical pieces of infrastructure is down. Nobody is around or awake to fix it. Can you do it? I was like, so everyone's like leaving the locker room. I like hop in, like close the door on myself and like go remote desktop into my computer at home. And that was just one of my most vivid memories. We had another very similar one where one of our largest clients, they had thousands of servers with us and they had like 50,000 concurrent players. If anyone's ever been on Hypixel, and we hosted Hypixel very early on. And super early on, they had someone that compromised the systems, an ex-employee of theirs or something like that, got back in and wiped everything. And I was in science class in 8th grade, and it was quite the text to get in the middle of a science lecture. So I'm like scrambling. We had no phones in class full. So those are a couple things where it was just like, you kind of have to juggle and fight for what you got to do at the same time. I still really enjoyed school. It was just a hard time balance. thing for me.
I find it really interesting that such an idea that became such a big thing for you just came up from a natural kind of random thought that popped into your head, like, hey, how can I continue to play games with my friend that's moving away now? So I think that's a really good pointer for everyone. Were there any major iterations within MC Pro hosting as you went forward with that in the next 2-3 years since you started? So were there any major pivots that had to happen or certain?
Yeah.
Kind of
No, that's a great question. So I think you have two kind of high level types of businesses, and MC Pro hosting was an execution business. So the idea was very locked in. We knew exactly what we needed to do as far as strategy, but the execution was the area where we had opportunity to really excel and beat out competition. So all the iterations for MC Pro hosting were execution oriented, not strategy oriented. And it's different when we'll talk about Mixer. But for MC Pro hosting, I think there were two main floodgates that allowed us to really open up and scale what we were doing. The first one was getting into influencer marketing really early on. So back in 2011, especially in the gaming space, influencer marketing was not prolific in the way that it is today. So what we would do is treat it like a friendship. We would go and find every Minecraft YouTuber that was doing exciting things. Even some of the smallest ones. We started with some of the smallest ones, 2,000-3,000 subscribers, not big channels. But we would say, hey, put our link to a server in the description of your video, and we'll give you a free 10-person server to hang out and make videos on. And we started building these like really tight-knit relationships. Nowadays, I think it's more transactional. There may be challenges with that. But especially back early on, we really took advantage of how open people were to kind of actually build a relationship around that. Now the problem is everyone's trying to do that. So it becomes... But that was the first iteration. And that was really great for two reasons. First, from a business standpoint, because we scaled really quickly off of those referral codes. But second, the relationships actually turned into something that impacted our strategy a couple of years later and led to the formation of Mixer. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But to answer your question, the other main iteration that we did centered around our onboarding process and the control panel. So we ended up, once we reached about half of our total scale, we re-engineered and built all of our own control panel, all of our own onboarding flow. And our goal was to make it feel like a game. When you went to MC Pro hosting, the very first thing you would do is enter your Minecraft username, and we'd render a 3D version of your character. And we'd make it like, hey, how many people do you want to play with you? Those kinds of things. And that was a big iteration that helped us from a technical standpoint. And I would say those are the two things. But like I said, it's an execution business. And so a lot of it was focused on just very small things. How do we increase performance? How do we negotiate deals for lower pricing? Those were skills that I learned and you kind of apply day to day to help us get up there.
Alrighty, awesome. So another natural question that popped into my head for someone starting a business at 13 was kind of how did you navigate certain gaps in knowledge? Because maybe from a technical standpoint, you were more confident in the execution of the business, as you said. But in terms of a strategy perspective, how did you kind of find guidance for yourself in order to make those strategic decisions you were just talking about?
That's a great question. So the first one, always being willing to learn and dive in and do things yourself. A lot of our very early prototypes were just me hacking around in Java, a language that I knew very little about going into things. And so lots of Google, lots of foundational stuff. So don't be afraid to go learn the fundamentals of what you're doing in order to solve a problem on top of it. I think a lot of people make the mistake of Googling with too much specificity. So if you need to create a control panel, you can go out there and Google control panel for Minecraft servers and look at that. But you can also look at how do you build a network or how do you code to build something like that in the first place, design fundamentals. So definitely invest a certain portion of your time on fundamentals as opposed to just solving the immediate problem in front of you, because you'll be able to kind of bootstrap yourself a lot quicker when you have similar problems in the future if you do that. So a lot of just research. Don't be afraid to hop on Google. Don't be afraid to watch YouTube videos. We all do it. I think there's maybe somewhat of a stigma around that, especially there was when I first started doing it. But being all self-taught is not a bad thing. So don't be afraid to learn from others would be my first thing. And then the other thing is really start to think about getting a great team. And it comes from friendships, right? Build friendships with people that have adjacent skills to you. Don't build friendships with people that all have the same skills as you. You want to find people that offer something unique and something that's really good, because then you're offering something as well, something that they don't have. So try to get really great founders, really great co-founders. That's one of my biggest tips. I would kind of give my example. I met my co-founder, James, and he knew nothing about coding or anything technical, right? He was someone who was interested in making editing a video for it. And that was kind of the extent of what he did. But what he brought that was really valuable is he was excited about building those relationships with streamers and YouTubers. That was something me as a super introvert, I was not about. You want me to go talk to 100 different people every day? I was like, no way, I'm not doing that. So having someone like James on board was really, really, really helpful in terms of filling that gap. And so I would super suggest people find those that have adjacent skill sets to their own that are just as passionate and as exciting about what they're working on. So that's my advice.
Alrighty. Those are some gem of advice. I'm sure some guys are writing it down. All right. And so quickly, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges or biggest challenge during your time working on MC Pro hosting?
I think a lot of the scaling was challenging for us. We went very quickly from servers underneath my desk all the way up to, hundreds of thousands of instances of Minecraft servers all around the world. And learning to manage that was hard. There were just all kinds of small things and just rookie mistakes that we made very early on that kind of chipped away. The biggest one that started out looking like a rookie mistake, and this is maybe the overarching theme for this mistake, is some things look small at first and will really come back to bite you. We started getting complaints of fraud from our payment processor, PayPal. And they would say, hey, we're getting a lot of chargebacks in your account, which is where when a transaction goes through and the parent or whomever doesn't recognize it, they can go call their bank and get a chargeback. And we got a call from PayPal saying, hey, we're getting a lot of these. What's going on? And what we found was people were using our service, our largest plans, these $600 Minecraft plans, to do credit card fraud and get refunds, and were abusing the platform that we built. And we started making some steps to help reduce it. We would refund these large orders, but we didn't have really robust fraud protection at the order process. And we kept getting these reports. And then one day we got a call from PayPal saying, hey guys, we're not going to continue to service payments for you anymore. And we had no alternative. We had no backup. This was when we were processing, $4 or $5 million a year in revenue. This was in all of our subscriptions were handled through recurring PayPal subscriptions. So PayPal canceling meant we didn't have a way to just get people's cards, rerun them. We used PayPal for all of that. And so losing that overnight was huge. So we had to scramble. We called everyone we knew and said, hey, we SOS, like this is a disaster. And when you have fraud like that, they have a list where they all communicate like, hey, don't take this client on. They have a lot of chargebacks. It's not worth it because it's bad for the credit card processors. So we had to find someone super last minute who could take it on. And we lost all of the recurring subscriptions that we had overnight and had to go have every kid get their parent to re-up their subscription, re-put in their card on a completely different website. And that was probably the biggest business execution nightmare that I ever had. So my advice there is just be really careful when you have small issues, right? Because they can become bigger really quickly. And trying to see things as they escalate, you're going to always have hundreds of things inundating you when you're scaling something like this. But being able to pick out those ones where it's like, oh, we higher fraud levels, and having a network around you that recognizes that is really, really important.
Alrighty, super interesting story. Thanks so much for that. We're going to pivot quickly to Beam a little bit now. So could you walk us through kind of what the idea actually was behind Beam, just to clarify, and also how you guys reached that idea? How did the idea come about?
Yeah, absolutely. Almost like a pivot from MC Pro hosting in some senses. We kept that business going, but what ended up happening is, like I said, we met a lot of really great friends in the gaming space, people that were making YouTube videos for 10 million subscribers, just these absolutely huge channels at the time back in 2014. And that was really fun for us, like getting to go out and hang out with them. And one of the things that we kept hearing kind of on a recurring basis from those streamers and YouTubers was they loved to stream on Twitch. It wasn't a big revenue source for them. They were doing it more so to kind of supplement their community. And the challenge with it is Twitch at the time had 30 to 40 seconds of delay between when you would say something and when your viewers would see it. So imagine trying to have a Zoom call or even just something simple like, hey, guys, what game should we play next was a challenge with 30, 40 seconds of delay. So we said, we've got this awesome distributed infrastructure at MC Pro hosting. We have servers and data centers all over the world. We don't know what we're doing, but what if we tried to build a low latency game streaming platform? So that was the hypothesis, the problem that we were trying to solve. And we launched this like super early rough pilot, this really rough MVP. It was just like a white website with a black video player and a little hacked together chat on a domain chili.cool. That was the original one. And we had a couple of our friends stream and tweet out the link, and we got a couple hundred people watching, and it crashed at one point, but we were like, wow, that was really cool. Just to be able to say like, hey, should I go left or right? Or should I like play this mode or that mode? Or grab this gun or that gun? And you could get responses like within 1 to 2 seconds was the original prototype latency. And we built it largely with off-the-shelf stuff. We took a bunch of our team at MC Pro Hosting and we said, hey, like what can we use that we already have or that's already out there to try to tackle this problem? And so that was kind of the genesis of the idea. It was the people around us had a problem and we had a bunch of technology and a bunch of infrastructure and thought it would be fun to solve it.
Alrighty, super cool. That's very interesting. So it's kind of like how one idea lets you stem into another one just because of what you guys learned.
Exactly.
Cool. At the time, you're saying Twitch was obviously very prevalent and you guys' main kind of pointer was the low latency and you guys were trying to compete with Twitch in that sense. So you talk about your focus on community and accepting feedback on a GeekWire article from 2017. It was at a gaming convention. They talked about that. And also like wanting to respect the community that may exist on a competitive platform like Twitch. Can you tell me a bit more about how you were walking the line of competing and wanting Mixer to be a North Star of streaming while also kind of respecting communities on those competitive platforms? Kind of what did that look like in practice?
Yeah, so we went through a lot of phases on that, but I would say the earliest phase is, I still really enjoyed watching Twitch and we thought about it as kind of an and, right? Not an or. So we wanted people to stream on both Twitch and Beam, especially early on. And the idea was, some content like esports, for example, works really, really well on Twitch. Like you don't need low latency if you're watching an esports broadcast. But if you're trying to, do like a Friday night game night with your community and you've got, 50 to 100 people, that's a really good candidate where low latency makes a meaningful difference. And so we went out and we worked with those communities where they had that split type content, where some days they would have really engaging content and other days they would have things that were more suited towards Twitch. And we would try to really focus on those Friday night game night kind of streams. So that was the earliest iteration. And I want to kind of talk about, I don't know if you have this in notes, but Beam went through a lot of iterations. So on the iteration concept, I think that's important to talk about because it was a strategy focused business. And I think we had much more churn around strategy at Beam and Mixer than we did on something like MC Pro Hosting, where it was relatively well defined early on. So I wanted to just talk about a couple of those. So we started by trying to solve the latency problem, right? And we had a lot of fun with that. We got around 20,000 monthly active users, which was this really fun group of people where we kind of knew everyone. But we started running into challenges because that aforementioned fraud issue with MC Pro Hosting happened right as we started working on all of this. If you remember, we bootstrapped Beam and Mixer off of funding from MC Pro. So when this happened, we had to start thinking about some really hard decisions because the infrastructure for Beam was very expensive and it wasn't making money early on. Live video is incredibly expensive. So we started thinking, okay, how can we solve this? How can we keep both businesses running? And the idea was like, let's go get investors, which is not something I had done before because at the very beginning, you mentioned the $7 that I used to buy the control panel for Minecraft was from my dad. So I was super, super new to this space. I started emailing everyone that I could find. I emailed Twitch. I was like, hey, we're working on something cool. What do you guys think about this? I just sent out as many emails as I could. And I found Y Combinator, which some of you guys may know is a really prestigious startup accelerator. And we gave our whole heart into our Y Combinator application. This was in 2015. And we actually got selected to fly out and meet Justin Kahn, who was the founder of Justin TV, which became Twitch. And I think Michael Seibel was there, who is the CEO of Justin TV and worked at Twitch for a while. So the idea of flying out to San Francisco to pitch the founders of our biggest competitor in the service that we had used since forever was really nerve-wracking, but really crazy. So we were excited about it and we gave our all into that pitch. And we go back to the Airbnb in San Francisco. We're like laying on the floor. Like we didn't have a bed or anything like that. And I get an email that comes through from Michael Seibel, and a dreaded email because if you get accepted, you get a phone call. We got an email. And it said, hey guys, like we loved meeting with you, but my heart sank. They were like, we don't see enough differentiation between you and Twitch to succeed in a marketplace where if you were to succeed, they would need to copy. So they would need to implement that kind of technology if we were successful, and they could potentially force us out of the market and there wasn't enough differentiation. Don't be afraid to talk to your competitors would be one thing I would say. If you're doing something unique, it's unique for a good reason. So that's one piece of advice I would give. But yeah, we went home and we started, there were some really hard questions that came up with that. And so we sat down as a team, and I was in like an Airbnb in San Francisco, and I saw this thing, Twitch Plays Pokemon. I was like, this is so cool. And the idea was everyone was typing in chat to move the Pokemon character around on the stream. And I was like, we have low latency streaming tech. What if we built in interactive controls into the platform itself that allowed you to like move a character around or drive a car or choose weapons or like strike lightning down? And this was just this epiphany that we already have this low latency tech. There's this cool interactivity going on. If we paired those two things, we might have something really special. And it was that idea where we built Beam Interactive, the set of controls that went underneath the video player that really opened us up for investment, because we could articulate so clearly, like, this is a completely different type of streaming. Twitch is still going to exist, but Beam is going to exist too. And it's going to be for these kinds of streams where you want to involve your audience in every decision. And so we started making software development kits and all these things. We built our own streaming protocol from the ground up that allowed for sub-second stream delay, which, by the way, if anyone wants to pick my brain about that after, I love talking about it. Something we were really proud of. We flew the team out to Berlin and we launched this super early version, but you could play like surgeon simulator and like your viewers could like help you do like a virtual surgery or like drive a truck in Euro trucking simulator, or we made a Minecraft integration, and then the acquisition kind of came from that, if you want to talk about that. But I'll let you ask any questions that you have kind of following up from that.
All right. Yeah, we're a little bit tight on time, so I'm going to ask one more question, but I think everyone picked up on was kind of exactly how what Matt said about how they took that rejection and kind of turned it into a next step was exactly what Salman was talking about. So Matt, I don't know if you caught that at the end, but Salman was talking about how any piece of rejection is always going to be a piece that you can take to improve on, whatever you had. And that turned out to be the case for you guys. Exactly.
Absolutely. I mean, getting that email, just my heart sank because we had put everything into that. It's one thing to go out and email, 50 people and get a bunch of rejections. It's another thing to have your business like writing one answer and really set yourself on one thing and to get that email coming back. But the nice thing is they gave feedback, and you get that when you really push for it. You have to be excited about something and really push for something, and they'll give you feedback. And if you take that and run with it, we definitely got lucky and had a lot of success. So I agree with that advice a lot.
Nice. Perfect. And lastly, man, what's next for you? How are you kind of looking into the future on what you're trying to get involved in? Is there an industry idea sector that you're kind of looking at, or are you kind of just open to anything right now?
Well, I mean, I left in 2019 for the reason that I wanted to go back and focus on a lot of the things from my childhood that I missed out on. So one of those was laser lighting design, right? I was super into that as a kid, just any like lights I could get my hands on. So I started doing some music videos for like EDM artists and things like that over when COVID was going on. And I'd love to do some live shows. So I think that would be really exciting for me. But yeah, I'm just enjoying taking it slow. My girlfriend and I just bought a house. So we're focusing a lot of our time on that, learning to be homeowners. Those kinds of things are really exciting to me right now. I'll go back and do something eventually, but for right now, I'm just kind of taking it slow and I'm enjoying that.
All righty. Perfect. So thanks so much. We finished right on the dot. So I think that's pretty good.
First of all, Matt, I just want to say thank you for being here. Out of a lot of the people we've met, I've been looking at based on what I've heard today and some research I've done, you've been amazing, especially starting a company at 13. Since you started it around 13 years old, did adults take you seriously? And if they did, how did you kind of go about communicating with them?
That's a great question. So one of the nice things about the way that we did everything is it was completely remote. I would say 90% of the people that we worked with had no idea. I mean, other than, I would hop on a call and maybe my voice would be a little bit squeaky. I think that would be probably the main thing. So that was an advantage. Back then it was all on Skype. All of our employees that we hired via Skype, which was just crazy thinking about it now in retrospect, but it worked. And I think it was one of the earlier remote success stories because that was all we knew. We had made friends on Minecraft on Skype. So why not hire people on Skype? I think in general, once we got to the point where we had more in-person stuff, I think just being able to have the success behind you and the numbers behind it helped. I think adults didn't really care that I was 15. They cared about, you've got 500,000 servers. Let's make a data center deal with you. And they started seeing more of this. I think it's more common and now especially, but even when we were working on it, there were more and more people like me that were, 15, 16 that were starting to run their own servers that had pretty significant scale. It's starting to become more normalized. And if you've got something that's truly unique and interesting and you're starting to scale it up, I don't think people will care as much.
So Matt, I'm a huge fan of all your works. My question was on the technical side, how did you create the zero latency server for your team?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And I can definitely dive in if anyone wants to talk super technical details. But the way that I kind of explain it at a high level is a lot of traditional video protocols aren't actually live, right? So when you go to Twitch, what you're actually looking at is little segments of video, literally MP4 files that are like 1 to 5 seconds long that are stringed together and played back as quickly to live as they can. What we did is we built something that was much more similar to video conferencing. So when we're talking right now, everything's being sent literally in real time via RTP. It's much faster protocol fundamentally. So we got rid of all of the video chunking, those 1 to 4 second chunks, and built it where things would flow in real time, much more like video conferencing. So the challenge there was mainly scaling it up because no one had ever tried to solve that problem before. Like there was 1 to 50 video conferencing, but the idea of doing a 1 to 5,000 low latency video conference was where we invested a lot of our technical effort. So the core concept was relatively easy. It was scaling it that was hard.
I just wanted to ask you, with your protocol that you did build from the ground up, being a proprietary protocol, could you see that translating to other markets, video conferencing, or do you think if you still, I don't know if you own the protocol, but could you sell it to Zoom or something like that?
That's a really good question. The answer that I would give to that, the protocol that we built was on top of something called WebRTC. So if anyone knows what WebRTC is, it's now becoming pretty standard anytime you're doing video conferencing in browser. What we did that was unique is we created a signaling protocol and distribution network for WebRTC. So our unique piece of the puzzle was really much more on the back end than it was on the front end browser side. We had a lot of help with that because Chrome had just implemented WebRTC within the month that we started working on the problem. So we got really lucky. And what I'll say is just kind of as a general high level piece of advice, you have to be lucky. You need to work hard and you have to be lucky to succeed. We definitely got in the right place, right time with both of the startups. I can't attribute it 100% to skill or luck. So I'll just say that. But to answer your question about where it could go, I believe a lot of the technology was rolled into Microsoft Teams. So I think they took a lot of our streaming stack and started implementing it in that scenario. And I think other people are working on it. I think Facebook had mentioned to their partners when they did the partnership deal that they had been working on a WebRTC-based streaming stack. So I think it's going to become more prolific. And what we did is really unique. But I think Microsoft is using it for Teams to answer your specific question.
Not to take you too much of your time, but it was your protocol, was that a software app or was that in browser? I know you said
it was all in browser.
Okay.
Our goal was so that you didn't need anything additional. And we did some crazy demos. So there's this thing called Pinnacle that allowed you to run native C code in the browser. And our very first iteration, we wrote entirely super low level and threw it up into a browser and tried to get it to run, but that wasn't ideal. So our principle was all in browser, no add-ons required. And that was where we ended up.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. My question was not just in times of rejection, but when stuff wasn't working, when that PayPal went down, when you had trouble finding clients or initial traction, or just had trouble working with teammates or with clients, I don't know, or managing your school time. I'm sure at some points it got frustrating. So how did you deal with that? And how did you make sure you and your team kept making logical decisions and persevere through all the hard parts of the startup?
That's a really good question. And to answer you honestly, how did you deal with that? Not super well. I think one of the funniest stories that I have in retrospect, it wasn't super funny to me at the time, but I was super bad at getting to school on time. I would stay up as late as I possibly could. And my parents didn't love that. They didn't love getting the calls from the teachers and whatnot. And I remember one night, 11 o'clock, and my parents were trying a bedtime with me. Hey, you need to be off the computer by 11:30 or something like that. And I was not having it. I was super not into that. And it was because I was trying to work. I was like, Dad, I got to finish this project. I have customers. I got to reply to these support tickets or whatever. And he was like, nope, we set this bedtime for you. And he walked over through the kitchen to the garage and shut off the power to all the servers underneath my desk. Just flipped the breaker and it was all off. I was like, oh no. And this was yeah. And my dad didn't really know what he was doing, and it's kind of on me because I had committed to that. But that was one story where I was like, wow, that was not good. And I think that better time management probably would have helped me in that case because I think some of it was on me. And I think communicating to my parents why it was so important what I was doing was something that was a continual thing. But I never really felt super lost in. I think they did really understand and did really care. But that was just one specific story. I think on the perseverance side, what makes it really a lot easier is having really close communication with your customers. So if you have people that are relying on what you're doing, it becomes a do or die kind of thing for you where you feel that direct personal obligation to the people that you're serving. And I think that's one of the most critical things you can have to really understand your customers, that communication on a daily basis. And I think that can help.
Hey, Matt, thank you for being here. Obviously, thank you for your time spending with us. I have a quick question to ask you. What advice would you give to young entrepreneurs who have great ideas, but not the skill sets to execute those ideas? Because obviously a lot of ideas are in the tech realm, but not everyone has the coding knowledge to execute those ideas. What advice would you give them?
I think that the majority of ideas that you're going to have, even if they're technical ideas, can be done with little technical knowledge, or at the very least, get them to a point where you have customers with very little technical knowledge. I would be happy to talk with you about your specific idea and think through some things. But with MC Pro Hosting, for example, we really leveraged a lot of existing tech for managing billing and control panels for websites that was out there. So we just downloaded a bunch of software and Googled how to set it up, to be totally candid, in the very earliest days, and made a lot of mistakes and took a lot of time to do that. But that trial and error got us to an MVP. It wasn't great, it wasn't amazing, but it was enough for a couple of my friends to plan a server underneath my computer. And I think if you can find that for your idea, whatever the equivalent for that is, get a couple customers, it becomes a lot easier to find people that are willing to help you take it to the next level. With equity, you can find a co-founder from that point, but often some of your customers at that point can become people that are excited about what you're doing and may have some of those skills. So we can definitely chat, but I think finding a low or no code way of getting to the very first customers is the most important thing you can do.
Hi, Matt. So my question was pretty much, since obviously your first server, that was kind of like your passion, right? So when did you realize that, okay, people actually want this and you could scale it into a business? And how did you start charging for it to cover your other costs?
That's a really good question. So it started off completely passion-based. My friend TJ went home and I was like, we got to keep playing this game. This is so much fun. So setting up all the initial port forwarding and all of that was purely driven by, hey, I want to keep playing this game. I met someone on that server that had their own server that was super laggy. Like you would destroy a block and it would come back. And I was like, no, we can't have this. I've got a computer underneath my desk with 6 gigs of RAM. Like, let me do it, which was not a lot at that time, but more than what they were running. And so I just excited about the idea of fixing their problem on a server that I played on. And I said, hey, send me $10 on PayPal. I'll move all the files over and run it on my computer. From there, on that server, I met someone named James, who I mentioned earlier, who wanted to make a video for them. And I told him, hey, like I just got $10 hosting the server. You can get $10 making a video. Do you want to help me make a website for all of this? And we set up a Weebly Wix like style website where you'd like click on a plan and it would take you to a PayPal link. And we sent it to all of our friends. And James really helped on the marketing side of that, which really just amounted to emailing, talking to as many of our friends as we possibly could, said, hey, do you want this? And from there, we started getting word of mouth and we started working with YouTubers. The first couple thousand subscriber YouTube channels helped us a lot with establishing a baseline of credibility. But that's the kind of early days. We put up a Weebly website. We were excited about it. And every time a payment would come through, I would go 30 times this would happen. I would go on Newegg and buy a bunch of computer parts and build a new computer underneath my parents' desk. So that's the story.
I've been looking like we're right now in the process of really coming up with and deciding on ideas. And something I was really interested in is sort of the side of trying to innovate versus competitors. So my question was, would you say that the key aspect to your success in business is innovation in technology and implementation?
Well, I think it's different for both the businesses. Like I mentioned, one was an execution business and one was a strategy business. And in the execution business, I think it was more so day-to-day improvements, like very small 1% improvements that amounted to a lot. With Beam and Mixer, we really had these couple key moments where we pivoted from a strategy standpoint. And in those areas, I would say innovation was probably the most important thing for us. And I think even more so, there was more that we could have done on that innovation front to really set ourselves unique from Twitch. My biggest thing, I think if you listen to a lot of the way that I talked in some of the last years of Mixer, was it wasn't enough to be different. You can't just do something differently. You have to fundamentally be different. And what I mean by that is you need to be able to use both Twitch and Mixer and not feel like they're kind of cannibalizing each other's market in the same way that TikTok doesn't cannibalize Twitch. YouTube and Twitch compete, but not in a way where you feel like you're cannibalizing viewers between the two. And so it's not enough to do something differently. You have to be fundamentally different. And I think we close to that with Mixer. I think if the interactive stuff that we did, I mean, I can talk about if anyone cares about kind of the trajectory with some of those things that we launched. Interactive, we had some really hard challenges scaling up. I think if that was successful, the scale of that was successful, it'd be a different story. But I also think that there was more on the table as far as truly being fundamentally different. I'd love to talk about that for anyone that's interested.
Okay, so my question was that you never gave up on any of your companies. So what's the limit between perseverance and just knowing that your company just cannot work?
That's actually a really good question. It's one that I've thought a lot about and I've had people ask. But I love the idea of really persevering. But the question you're asking is when you stop, right? What if something's not working? And I think you're going to get to the point where you have 10 people that cannot live without the product that you have. And once you kind of hit that early threshold when you're first testing an idea, and you have those 10 people that don't just like what you're doing, they don't just love what you're doing, but they rely on what you're doing. Once you hit that point, you have something that's interesting. And I think it's worth really kind of digging deeper into. And then the next question is there a path to scaling it? So you've got 10 people that love it. Do you have a path that you can look at and persevere down the road 2 years from now? Can you have 100,000 people that can't live without your product? And executing on that is where perseverance comes. So you need to have that path defined before you go start just kind of running around aimlessly. And I think at MC Pro Hosting, we had that really early because all these people relied on our service. If our server went down, we had hundreds of people emailing me going, oh my gosh, get it back up right now, to the extent that I had to hide in a school locker room. So once you start having those things, really, really, really persevere. There's going to be a lot of hard challenges that come up. But if you're prior to that point, don't be afraid to try something completely different. We tried to launch a couple side businesses, some that were doing other game servers, some that were doing gaming conventions. And we never really reached that point with those businesses where we had people that could not live without them. And we tried different things until we reached Mixer, which was a really, really fun story and a really fun journey. So find those first 10 people and then find the path to get to 100,000. And if you have those two things, don't stop. That's my advice.
Thank you for being here. My question was, you started with simple code for Mech Pro hosting, and then you were able to transition to Mixer and Beam. And earlier you were talking about how you figured out to make, like Twitch was using, I think you said 4 combining clips together, which was why there was a delay. And you were able to solve that problem. How did you do that?
My question is a tiny bit different. It's less on the practical stuff and more on the larger picture kind of question. But my question was, if anything, being on the market with competitors is not about functionality, but if your customers see you being different enough so that they don't use just Twitch, for example. So how did you still persevere with such a big competitor for attention on the market? And how did you manage to tell the customers and clearly make the customers understand that your program is supposed to work in synthesis with Twitch as opposed to like to compete with it and substitute for it?
Okay, good 2 questions in there. Let me start with Stella's question. So Stella, to answer you, it's really 2 fundamentally different ways of doing it, and they both have pros and cons. The biggest issue and the reason why Twitch didn't have this low latency from the beginning was the earliest versions of it used Flash, and then Flash doesn't exist anymore. And the only way to do it was this technology called HLS or MPEG-, which literally, like I talked about, you would stream to Twitch. And Twitch's job would be to take that live stream and chunk it up into like these 5-second videos. And they would link all those 5-second videos together and try to send them to you as quickly as it could. But you were still absolutely at the minimum 5 seconds behind, and usually as much as 30 because they were trying to buffer and have tolerance for poor network conditions. So what we did is we said browsers have this new thing called WebRTC that people are using to do video conferencing. And it does away with all of this chunking of the video, and instead just kind of fire hoses it to the user and hopes that they receive it in time. So the challenge with that is handling poor networks is a problem because there's not much leeway. So we just approached this problem completely differently, and we had a different set of problems. And I can talk about those more in detail. But really, it was about kind of fundamentally flipping the book. And in one story, I talked with Twitch very early on and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you guys think? And they're like, it'll never work. You can never do it. We tried things like that. And it worked. We did E3 2018 with 200,000 people watching. We had 4K low latency, which was just super, super like validating and exciting. And so my advice that would be more general is don't be afraid to try something completely differently. And you're probably, if you're going into this without knowing anything, going to end up inadvertently doing things completely differently than other people do. So don't be afraid. Ignorance can almost be a tool. We had no idea how hard the problem that we were biting off was. And I think we ran into it kind of blind in a way that allowed us to kind of stumble on something that was really successful. So ignorance can be a really great tool because there were a lot of problems with what we did, but solving them was the joy and the challenge of that. And then Saba, to talk about your question, the marketing of the differentiators, is what we called them, was incredibly challenging because when you would go to mixer.com, what you saw looked very similar to Twitch, the homepage. And that was maybe the challenge. Like the presentation was very, very similar. And a lot of those, what we would call like hidden gems, took a little bit of communication. And what you'll find is, for the most part, when you have a consumer product and people spend 30 seconds looking at your website, they're not going to get into those deep differentiators. They might not even notice the low latency, to be honest. And it's not, we flashed a big page that came up and said, oh, this stream is low latency. We try to do a little bit in the player, FTL, faster than light, when you turn it on. But people aren't going to see those things unless you make them very, very apparent. And I actually believe that was one of the fundamental challenges with scaling Mixer at Microsoft, was just that lack of visible differentiation. So I would have done things differently to answer your question in that regard.
Okay. Thank you very much. You gave me 2 pieces of advice that you wish you knew at 16. I just wish you could jump into those real quick. So aspirationally and tactically, what were the 2 things you wish you knew at 16 years old?
I think I recall those. I don't know, I may stumble around. But the first one is thinking back to when I first started MC Pro hosting. It wasn't the kind of thing that I was looking at a 5-year time horizon and like, wow, this is like what I want to be doing for the next 5 years, or this is a multi-million-dollar business. Like it wasn't like that at all. I never thought that it would be. So even though you're likely to fail, it's totally possible that the things that you're doing today are going to be your MC Pro hostings, your mixers, your companies that get acquired. So don't be afraid to chase a big idea right now. Test it in a really small, confined market. Test it in the smallest MVP that you can. But just know, truly, the thing that you're working on right now absolutely can be super big. So get excited about that, please. Like, I really want people to know that. So that's the first one. And then the second one, I remember, is about focus. So I think we spent a lot of time, especially at Mixer once we got into Microsoft. What I would almost consider failings as a leader is not driving focus enough. We had a lot of money. We had a lot of people. We had a lot of time and resources. The resource that we found was the most important thing was focus. And so we had this low latency stack. We had the interactive game controls. We had people coming to us asking for esports, and kind of all of these competing priorities. I don't think we've spent enough time doing one of them really, really well. And be careful how many things you chase, because there's going to be a lot that's vying for your attention. The most valuable resource, I would trade millions of dollars for more focus, especially once we started to get up to scale. So just as a piece of context, as you start to scale what you're doing and start to decide against different ideas.
Right on. So without any further ado, I want every single person still on this call to unmute themselves and start a chorus of thank yous.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, have a great
This is epic.
Thank you,
All
man.
right.